Greetings. My name is Kate Rademacher, and we're here with Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity. I'm delighted to have Mark Grayson be joining us today. Mark is an alum of a Writing for Your Life conference, and he has recently published I think it's his first book. The title is Getting Naked, A Field Guide for Men, and it really explores issues of masculinity and authentic masculinity. So I'm excited to talk today with Mark. Mark, welcome. And maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about your background, sort of how you got into writing and what brought you to this point. Thanks again for being here.
Sure. Well, and thank you, Kate, for having me. I look forward to having this conversation with you. Um, you know, my career has mainly been in the private sector in the nonprofit world, trying to pull the levers of first industry and then the nonprofit organizations that I was involved with in order to affect some kind of fundamental change in the world. I was a agent out in Hollywood early on, and then a producer of children's programming. I happened to be the guy that helped develop Bill Nye the Science Guy. And we won a bunch of awards for our children's programming back in the day, as they say. After that, Chuck Schwab decided that he wanted to do something to reorient the learning disability space. And so he recruited me out of the private sector to work with him for 10 years, doing a nonprofit startup. And that was really fun. And we had a lot of impact in that space. And then after that, I became an entrepreneur again, launching a social network for kids, a safe place for them to be online. So it's been a really interesting journey, and through it all, I have been writing, but I've been a writer for my own personal benefit and pleasure. And I never really expected to be published. But a really interesting thing happened to me turning 50. I was invited to attend a conference out in the West Coast called Women Teach Men. And that conference really was designed to reverse the paradigm that most conferences follow. That is that they're men up on the stage, pontificating about all the stuff that they know, and women are, more often than not in the audience listening to men mouth off endlessly. And this conference was all led by women who had a lot to say after Me Too occurred. And at that conference, we were asked at the end to stand up in a sacred circle before Rev Joe, who was a towering figure. I mean, she could invoke the wrath of God with her little pinky, and shaking like a leaf, because we were all asked to swear an oath as to what we were going to do to change all this. I found myself swearing that I was finally going to publish some of my work. So that was really the pivotal moment that got me kind of off the dime of, having all these manuscripts and things that I'd written for myself and had shared with others privately, and finally taking the step of trying to get my message out there. So that's, my background and how I got to writing. Yeah.
Great. Well, tell us about the book. So the book, again, let me hold it up if I can get is titled Getting Naked, A Field Guide for Men. And I know that sort of you wrote a series of articles that kind of led into this project, perhaps you could say. And so can you just give us an overview of the book? Kind of what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to say with this book? Thanks.
Yeah. Right. So I probably should start by saying that all the writing that I have done up until this point has really been along the lines of a double helix. On the one hand, I have been trying to sort out for myself what it means to be an authentic male in these modern times. I found myself as a young man, very early on, completely out of step with conventional notions of masculinity. I just wasn't willing to play the game that we are required to play as men if we want to be successful in business and in life. And we can talk about that a little bit, but it did not make sense to me, and I had no interest in being a part of it. And then the other thing that was happening for me from very early on was that I was on a spiritual journey. And so I, spent a lot of time writing, recording my experience, both as a man and as a spiritual person, trying to figure out my sort of role in the world and what my calling, my purpose, was in on this planet. And that's what led to this book, which is in many ways a distillation of all the things that I've written over the course of a lifetime. There's, I have a memoir from my early days, 20-year-old. I have a memoir from being a parent and what it's like to be a father, parenting two boys. And then I have a memoir that is all about the sort of the period in the 50s where the spiritual journey that I was on took off in a major way. And that's also when I started actually publishing essays on the Good Men Project. There are now 50 essays that sort of became the first instantiation of the ideas that are in the book. What I've done now with the book is distill it all down into a framework that is built around some of the major tenets of the dominance-based culture of masculinity. So each chapter takes on a major sort of construct of that culture and deconstructs it and shows ways in which we can actually decondition ourselves from the behaviors that are conditioned into us as men from a very early age. So to kind of race through it very quickly, the first chapter, well, it's actually probably, let's see, the second chapter, but it's all about the very complicated relationship that men have with their bodies and the amount of shame that we experience about our bodies. Now, in this culture, we are trained to really, celebrate our strength as men, literally our physical prowess, and that becomes a big issue for boys as they grow up. Always constantly trying to prove themselves. And what the chapter suggests is that we need to actually take our armor off as men and make ourselves much more open and vulnerable and accessible. And I chose that as the entry point into this deconditioning, this sort of reframing and reclaiming our capacities of men that are conditioned out, because I think it probably is relevant to all the rest of the things that we might do as men. The next chapter actually takes on the idea that our culture really trains us to devalue the feminine. And yet we all know that we have feminine parts to our personalities as men. And so in that chapter, I suggest ways in which we can reclaim sacred feminine wisdom and integrate it into our own daily lives. And I have the benefit of actually having lots of male friends who are really good illustrations of how this can be done. Successful men, very, you would think of them as traditional men. And that is one point that I really want to make here, is that I'm talking about expanding traditional masculinity. not reinventing it, but really reclaiming the capacities that are conditioned out of us. The next chapter is really taking a hard look at the way in which men are taught to detach from their emotions, and be sort of stoic and not as communicative as we ought to be, as partners, colleagues, to the women and also the men in our lives. And so that chapter is a really important one. We know that we've invested a lot of energy in emotional intelligence over the last few years, but in fact, that's not enough. And what we really need to be doing now is investing in relational intelligence. And there's a lot of research that I pull into this book that shows how that can be done. And I take a very provocative pose in this book of suggesting that we need to reclaim our capacities for nonverbal communication, and that we really need to honor the fact that touch is really important in communication and in healing. So there's a whole section in that chapter about how we can do that. The next chapter is taking a hard look at male sexuality. And there's a ton of emerging research there that indicates that there's a lot going on under the hood, way more than what and people want to acknowledge. Most men will never talk about it. And so that chapter was a tough one to write, but I think it's really important for people to understand what's really going on. And there I had the benefit of talking to many, many different people, psychologists who work a lot with men, looking at the research, talking to sex therapists, 5 or 6 of them, and also a whole bunch of men to kind of get some reality checks about what's going on. After that, and you may notice a trend here. What we're doing is going deeper and deeper and deeper into the male psyche. So then the next chapter is really going to the substrate of our being, and it's all about the need for us to reclaim our spirituality as men. And in fact, this book, I don't really say it until about this point in the book, 2/3 of the way through, is a spiritual journey for men. And this chapter, Practice Stillness, is really all about the need for us to acknowledge that that it is important for us to develop a meditation practice, and I differentiate that from a mindfulness practice. Nothing wrong with all the mindfulness apps, but I think it's really important to have a meditation practice to open up the space within us where new things can emerge. The next chapter after that is the importance of taking a hard look at how we work 24/7, because that's another big part of man box culture. Men are providers and they need to be constantly, working. And that's the same is true for women, by the way. So, and I've been told by lots of women who have read the book that they got a lot out of it for themselves, but that we really need to rethink how much time we put into work, and make sure that we take a break for rest and retreat. And Kate, I know you've written a book about this, so I don't have to go on and on and on, but that chapter talks about what that would look like for men. And it proposes that, men should more often go on retreat. They should go on retreat with each other as men and talk about some of these issues that we all experience. And the book suggests various workshops that I have benefited from and men could attend. And of course, there's a spiritual component to this as well. And finally, the next chapter in this sort of 7-point framework is reframing definitions of success. Because we live in a world that is so materially oriented, we tend to define success as sort of maximizing our output and our material rewards from work. And in fact, there really is a need for us to balance work, play, health, and love. And so that chapter really focuses on how we do that. So it's kind of a 7-part journey. It doesn't, that's very clear in the book that there's no need to do it, go on this journey in any particular order. Though I've laid it out in the book in the order that it is, because just logically to explain it, it sort of builds on, each chapter builds on the one before. But and the book really does 3 things. It weaves together the research on all these topics that I've been able to, assemble into each chapter. The stories of other men and their experience of doing some of this work that we need to do as men in order to, reframe our identities as men, rebuild them from the inside out. And then the last thing is that I do share some of my own personal journey, so that there's a lot of illustration of what this could look like for men and for women.
Well, thank you so much for that overview. And, I know that these conversations about gender and gender identity are increasingly salient, I think, given the current political and cultural climate, including conversations about transgender and non-binary people, and of course, diversity, equity, inclusion. So I think some of these questions and conversations about authentic, as you use the word authentic, sort of authentic identity, are really important as we have those broader kind of cultural and political and policy conversations. But sort of zooming into the individual level, I would ask sort of what advice do you have? What advice do you share in the book? And I've had a chance to read some of it, so I know this, but I'd love to hear you narrate it. What advice do you have to men who want to sort of get started on this journey of maybe self-exploration and thinking more about sort of how they define masculinity or what masculinity means to them? Thanks.
Well, I think the most important step is to give yourself permission to question the conventional assumptions about how we are supposed to behave as men. And in the book, I suggested that a really good first step, and I know it's unusual, is to get naked, whatever that means to you. I happen to believe, because we know from somatics, that the body really does play a huge role in helping us sort of frame our sort of sensibility in life, that there is a really important need for men to get physically naked, take their armor off, and get really comfortable with themselves as men. But that's a metaphor as well. It's important for us to do a lot of kind of soul searching about who we are and what makes us tick, even if it doesn't fit the traditional definitions of what it means to be a man. And I think if there's anything that I hope people take away from the book, it's that, in fact, there are many different ways to be a man. And it's incumbent upon all of us to figure out what works best for each one of us individually, and then live out that reality as best we can with all of our, our loved ones, our families, our friends, our neighbors. It sometimes isn't easy, right? Especially if you're doing something that kind of runs afoul of what most people would expect. But that's fine. Have the courage to go to the cliff and jump off the cliff and plunge in. I mean, I think that's what really needs to happen right now. And I really hope people don't get caught up in the whole sort of the way in which these conversations have been framed is like, there's this sort of traditional masculinity versus progressive masculinity. I don't think it's either or. It never has been at least in my experience and what I've observed over the last 60 years, that we're all an interesting blend. And we need to just acknowledge that. That there's just a huge amount of diversity, huge amount of variability, and let's celebrate it. And no, let's not try and make everybody conform to this very narrow, rigid definition that, Tony Porter and Paul Kivel codified in the 80s and 90s called man box culture, which is really wreaking havoc and causing all kinds of problems in our society right now. We need to get rid of the box, and we need to, celebrate the many different ways in which we are male.
Well, thank you for that. Maybe we can pivot now and just talk a little bit about the writing and publishing process for you. And of course, in Writing for Your Life, we have spiritual writers who are interested in all phases of writing, including the craft itself, but also sort of the journey to publication. And so I'm just curious if there's anything that surprised you in this journey or that you learned, perhaps advice you have for others that you've gleaned along the way. I know that everybody has a different pathway to publication. So were there any kind of aha moments for you in that process? Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I would say, I come to this a little bit late. It isn't that I didn't make any attempts to publish my work. I did actually. I guess it was the second piece that I wrote. I took it out with an agent, and it became clear that it was just going to be really tough to find a publisher for a memoir of someone like me who was an unknown person. But I think the thing that I learned was like, I'm a writer, like it or not. It's the way in which I process my experience and have always done so. And so I guess what I discovered then in this most recent round of trying to get published, I worked with an agent who was convinced that the world needed this generation's version of Sam Keene's Fire in the Belly. And so we took out the book and it didn't sell, on 20 publishing houses. A second agent took it out, who's known for his ability to place books, especially ones that haven't placed, and it didn't sell. And I think what I realized is that it's just hard. It's really hard to get published, especially if you're writing on a topic that people aren't sure the world really wants to read about, and they can't figure out who's going to be actually the primary target. I have to tell you, people are still trying to figure that out with this book, and I'm pleased because there's a lot of guys reading it, but there's a lot of women too. So I think what I would say is that, you just got to keep persisting. And in my case, I decided, well, this is a message that the world needs to hear. And I've worked on it now for many, many years. I think it's probably time for me to just bite the bullet and publish it. So I did. And if that's the option that makes the most logical sense to you, then go ahead and do it. So now the book exists. I published it through Ingram Spark. You can order it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. Bookstores can order copies of it from them. So, it's all there. And I think the other thing that I was surprised by is that I didn't realize how different publishing was going to feel than writing the book. And by that, I want to just say, and it may be that just because of the topic of this book, I feel this way. But I had been publishing essays on the Goodman Project, saying things that I thought were pretty controversial at times, and I was fine with putting that message out there. but I really didn't understand how incredibly exposed I was going to feel um, when I published this book. And it almost stopped me from publishing it. I was right at the finish line. I'm like, do I really need to do this? I have since found out, talking to lots of people, that this is a common phenomenon, that a lot of people go through this experience at the very end of the journey, because all of a sudden you are in a public space in a way that you have not been before. And I guess I would just say it's a good thing, have the courage again, to jump off the cliff, and do it. It's all going to be fine. But that was the big surprise for me.
Yeah, I think that vulnerability of having your book baby out there is a familiar and common experience for those of us who are on that path. Well, maybe let's go back to the book and just I know this is an ambitious topic, and as you said, that there's some controversial dimensions of talking about gender and masculinity. What is your big picture hope for the book? What do you hope readers will take away, and what sort of hope change, if any, do you hope that the book may contribute to? Thanks.
Yeah. So that's a really, it's a surprisingly tough question. I mean, I think everybody has aspirations of the book being read, by um, a large enough audience so that you feel like your message is being heard. I actually have thought a lot about this, and I think about it in three different ways. I think first and foremost, I hope that there's a bunch of individuals out there, I would say men and women, who read the book and find some insight in the book that is totally transformative for them. And the book has been out long enough so that I've been told that psychotherapists are giving it to their patients. And I've even heard that a young man credits it with transforming his life. And I can't even begin to describe the feeling of knowing that there was just one person. And if that's all that happens, I'm fine with that. But I do hope that there is this sort of group of people out there that directly benefit from the book. Then beyond that, I would love for it to be read by thought leaders who are engaged in conversation about these issues and what we need to do in order to address the crisis that men find themselves in right now. I mean, it's a crisis of our own creation. We have nobody but ourselves to thank for it. But at the end of the day, we need to fix it. And so I'm really hopeful, and I do have a chapter at the end of the book that talks to, 8, 10 of some of the leaders who have been working in the men's movement for a number of decades. And there is a sense of optimism that even though it seems like things are still a mess, that it's going to be a little bit like the Berlin Wall. Nobody saw it coming, but there was a lot of stuff going on over a period of time, and then all of a sudden the wall fell down. And I think that we're going to find a similar moment in this space. So that would be another outcome that I would really love to make happen. And then, to the extent that it has a sort of a message that can be part of the kind of like the water supply, that people find some piece of it that really is, relevant, even if they don't find themselves in, in a space where they wish that they could change the trajectory of their lives and the behaviors that have led to this sense of isolation and disconnection. I mean, I have a great life and a lot of connection. And yet I still find myself having to do a lot of the work, and wanting to do a lot of the work, because I think as human beings, we want more intimacy and connection in our lives. And we need that right now. We need to find a way of listening to each other and appreciating each other. And the book really does talk about that a lot as it takes people on this journey, of discovering the inner identity that is really and truly yours. So I hope people go on that journey with me, and find them, and find, the real you inside of you.
Well, thanks so much, Mark. And just in closing, perhaps, I know you mentioned where we can get the book online, but if you can just speak more broadly about how people can find you or be connected to you and your work. And
Sure.
just any final thoughts or words before we close. Thanks again.
Um, well, first of all, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I've got, so I have all kinds of social handles, and I should probably have a sheet that I pop up. I also do have a website called the Naked Man Collective, which we are in the process of gearing up, my notching up my social media presence. So I think it's going to be a lot easier to find me, but there is a way of reaching out to me on that website. It's called the Naked Man Collective. I am also the founding director of the Trinity Spiritual Center. And so you can find me there too. Send a message there. And yeah, and the book is just, again, it's on Amazon and all the other online book platforms, so it shouldn't be a problem to find it. Just Google my name um, and the title, and it comes up. Yeah, and as for a final thought, I guess I just would say that I know these are difficult times, but I am really optimistic that we are um, moving through a period in which we'll see a lot of positive change. And I am hopeful that this conversation will be part of it.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. And I appreciate that hopeful um, perspective and your optimism. So, again, just in closing, Mark Grayson is the author of a new book called Getting Naked, a Field Guide for Men, which really explores um, the ways that men are currently in crisis and how men can search and find an authentic masculinity. So, thank you again, Mark, for talking with us and for the work you're doing, and many blessings in the book launch.
Well, thank you, Kate. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
All right. Well, thanks again. Take care.
Oh.